deep breaths, I think, are necessary here. There's another one. Okay. Tennessee at Georgia. Saturday, 3:30 Eastern kickoff, a little after 3:30 actually, on CBS. We will be there. The Every Given Saturday tour is headed back to Athens. We're going to be there Friday. There will be no live show. We're going to do the Thursday show here, and then I'll head down there, I don't know, sometime Friday. Excited is how I would describe myself every week. This is like 5 or 6 levels up. I've told you we don't get to go to Georgia nearly as much as I'd like because their schedule doesn't dictate it, but it does dictate it this week. Do you realize how big this game is? It's number 1 versus number 2 in the AP. It's number 1 versus number 3 in the college football playoff rankings. What it is in the JP poll is TBD. I'll reveal that later tonight. This could be the biggest game in the SEC East this millennium. This is the biggest game in the SEC East in many of your lifetimes. It's a 3:30 kick. Sanford Stadium will be on fire. It'll be an environment unlike some of these guys have ever seen. Tennessee saw one in their home building. They're going on the road. They're going into one now. It is what regular season college football is all about. I'm not going to jump on this soapbox again. Enjoy these kind of matchups and enjoy this urgency. Enjoy this zero safety net under the game kind of mentality while you have it, because it won't exist much longer. I'm going to put a question out there to you as we dive into the preview, and I'm not going to answer it. If Georgia loses this game, are they out of the playoff? That's why I heard a lot of people talking about that today. I don't have a solid answer for you, but there's some speculation that their strength of schedule may not be good enough to where if they lose this game, they're not in Atlanta. You've got a one-loss Georgia that won the title last year, but their strength of schedule is just not good enough to vault them into the playoff. Who knows? Hey, the best shot they have, clearly, is to win. Tennessee's getting 8.5 here. You see that line? There's a lot of confusion about this. Some people thought Tennessee was going to be favored. No. But many of you thought Tennessee was going to be about a 4 or a 5-point dog. But odds makers are handing you over a touchdown. What do we think about that? Well, here's the argument I'd make. I think the line is a little big. I'll show you what we think in a little while. Don't change anything about Tennessee except one detail. Put Alabama jerseys on them. March them into Sanford Stadium. What's the line on this game? It ain't 8.5. It's below a touchdown. So a lot of what's going on here is Tennessee just doesn't have the proven pedigree that a team like Alabama would have. You could have the exact same production, exact same roster, everything could be the same, but take the pedigree of an Alabama, for example, and march them in there. So, yeah, that's in play. It should be in play. That's all part of this. But you want to make sense of this line? You want to make sense of Tennessee getting over 8.5 going into Georgia? Recruiting, pedigree, and freeze points. That's all this line's about. Let's talk about it. Key number 1. Can that Tennessee passing game meet the freeze point? I've done a lot of radio in Knoxville the last 2 years, really, but the last couple of weeks we've been talking a lot about this. The concept is we saw this game looming of whether Tennessee's passing game was so good, their offense and their passing game was so good it can just operate on anyone. Because we've seen that happen before. There are a lot of comparisons about 2019 LSU floating around, so much so that I think I'm going to shy away from it. It just makes you sound like a seal at this point. Just kind of repeating everyone. But the 2020 Bama team, the 2019 LSU team, some of these really, really prolific offensive teams, what we saw is they were so good, it didn't matter what kind of defense you put in front of them. Because there was a certain level, the freeze point, if you will, where if you got past it, it doesn't matter. And we use the freeze point all the time on the show. Kind of think about it inverted, but you got 34 degrees, nothing's freezing. You got 38 degrees, nothing's freezing. You get to 32.4, all of a sudden that water will freeze. The reality is most teams aren't good enough to do that. But then the further past that freeze point you just get a harder and harder freeze, but you got to get to 32.4. Most teams offensively can't get to that point. That's why most of them just grind to a halt when they play Georgia, and you see their production just fall off a cliff. It doesn't kind of taper off, it falls off a cliff. Tennessee could be different. And if Tennessee meets that freeze point, then all of a sudden it's the Georgia defensive statistics that you see start to look weird and start to spike in the wrong direction. Does Tennessee have that? You got Jalen Hyatt there, guy's in the middle of what could be a Biletnikoff award-winning campaign. You've also got Cedric Tillman back. But the key to me here is that run game. Tennessee runs the ball more than Georgia does. I was listening to our buddies, college football nerds, talk about this game, and they were pointing out, basically they were simultaneously saying it as I was looking at it on a stat sheet. They're right. If you thought about the offensive profiles of these teams, you would think Tennessee airs it out, Georgia ground and pound. Tennessee runs the ball more than Georgia does. Georgia throws the ball more than Tennessee does. If I did the blind resume, every one of you would lose $10 betting on that. You just wouldn't suspect that, but that's the case. If you're high on Tennessee, if you're picking them to win this game, no doubt you are thinking about the Bama game. And not the back of your mind, if you're picking Tennessee to win this game, you're thinking about the Bama game in the forefront of your mind. What did Tennessee do that day? Well, they threw the ball all afternoon to Jalen Hyatt. Anytime they wanted it, he was there. Boom, touchdown, 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 touchdown. Was it 5 of them, I think? Yeah. They did that because they could run the ball. Bama couldn't afford to do what Bama's been able to do in the past and play that too high shell safety look because they had to march another guy down there because they couldn't stop the Tennessee run effectively enough. And that's the question for Georgia. It's probably one of the huge deciding factors in this game is, are they good enough up front to stop Tennessee's run with 4, for example? If they can, Georgia's going to win the game. It's pretty simple, unless they turn the ball over 4 or 5 times. So for all the talk about Tillman, all the talk about these wide receivers, the thing to watch early on, it won't take long for you to realize it. The thing to watch early on is, how is Tennessee running? How are they having success? What is the yards per carry? Are they getting stoned? Is it 2nd and 9 constantly? Or are they really putting themselves in position with those 2nd and manageable, 3rd and short, to where they can get that first down and then start tempoing you to death? Because the other thing to think about is how that game starts to play out early on decides how much conditioning is going to matter in the second half for Georgia. Kirby Smart talked about this earlier this week. They've spoken about it internally the entire summer because they knew this particular game is going to offer a different challenge than pretty much any other one on their schedule, because this is a team that runs tempo and runs more plays per minute than any other team on their schedule. Well, if you force a bunch of 3 and outs in the first half, you're good to go in the second half. If they've already run 45 plays on you in the first half, Georgia defensively, the most plays they've been on the field all year, 71, and that was last week. And a lot of that was garbage time. So you could get them into some unfamiliar territory, and all of a sudden, it's crazy what happens to your discipline. It's crazy what happens to your gap soundness. It's crazy what happens to your angles when you're sucking wind a little bit more than you have all year. Now, Kirby Smart knows that. Josh Heupel knows that. That's why that first half's really imperative. You may not crack them in the first half just with whatever you put on the scoreboard, but you could plant the seeds to doing it in the second half because of what you do in the first half. Key number 2, Georgia needs the game of the year from their offensive line. There have been mixed results from that crew. They played horrifically at Missouri. Lately, they've played some of their best ball. They need an incredible day from their offensive line. These are the games that Todd Monken was brought to Athens, Georgia for. He's been there a few years, the offensive coordinator, but this is really the one. This is the kind of game where you need him. You got a bunch of 3 and outs early. You are flirting with disaster playing a team like Tennessee. But what Georgia can do, really even more so than Bama probably this year, is Georgia can maintain drives on you. Bama can home run you like Bryce Young any given moment. He can pop you. But Bama doesn't sustain consistent drives like Georgia's been able to this year. And again, what are we talking about? We're talking about what this game looks like in the 3rd and 4th quarter. One of the other surest ways to make sure your defense is good to go in the 4th quarter is being able to 1st and 10, 2nd and 5, 3rd and 1, move the chains. You don't have to sit there and snap the ball like Tennessee's going to do every 5 seconds. You can use those tight ends. You can screen them to death. And you can just, what's the word? Matriculate. You can matriculate it down the field. I think it's the first time we have ever used that word on this program. Huge Chiefs fan. I'm just saying it's the first time I've ever used it. If they start to do that, that's the Monken effect. You're not beating Tennessee by bombing away on them. You don't get sucked into that. That's not Georgia's modus operandi anyway. Now, here's what I am curious about. There's a lot of question out there about how to gauge Tennessee defensively. What are they defensively? There's some of that remains to be seen, but I will tell you pretty confidently what I think they are, and that is a good run defense. They are good at defending the run, And if you haven't watched them a lot and you're a Georgia fan and you think that you're just going to lean on them and just physically you'll outclass them and you'll just kind of bully ball your way down the field, you're in for a long afternoon. That's not what's going to happen. You can beat them. You can absolutely beat them. It's not going to be because you're running it for 6 or 7 yards per carry. It's not going to be all of a sudden, well, let me take this back because it ends up in a hype video otherwise. I have a hard time seeing it turn out that way. And we've got enough of a profile on Tennessee now to know if you're going to beat them, you better have enough offensive balance. It doesn't have to look pretty on the stat sheet, but they better be convinced you can throw the ball on them, and you're willing to, which brings us to the next point. And this is really where if you're absent A.D. Mitchell, which they will be, this is really where it could show up for Georgia. Great tight end room. Darnell Washington probably going to be a little more active this week, I would imagine, than we've seen him. Brock Bowers is a superstar. They've got to have those guys. You've got to find your own mismatch. Hyatt did it against Bama. You need those tight ends doing it against Tennessee. Here's a third key, and this is one that's all-encompassing. You never know how staffs and how teams are going to handle these spots until they get in them. Sometimes you see a team that looks like they were shot out of a cannon in these moments, and sometimes you see teams, especially if it's new to them, you see them kind of try and feel their way into it, kind of try and find their footing, so to speak. Tennessee needs to be so ultra aggressive coming out of the gate here. I'm talking about coaching staff. I'm talking about the way they call plays, how they make decisions on 3rd and 4th downs, special teams. They need to be ultra aggressive because if you want to see Georgia pucker, even at home, put a 14-0 lead on them. Watch what happens. That's not an offense built to come from behind like that. It's absolutely not. Few offenses are, I'll grant you that. But Tennessee has that ability. They've done it. We've seen them do it a couple of times already in big games this year. But you got tempo, you got new looks, taking chances on defense, which they can afford to do because they know they can score. It's kind of become one of their trademarks, is a little more aggressive play, kind of like LSU did in 2019 on defense, because they know we're not Texas A&M, we're not Iowa State. We don't have to hold the opposition to 17 or less to give ourselves a shot to win. My biggest questions here and what made me struggle so much today, I just decided my pick like 30 minutes ago. What made me struggle so much today is I wonder, will Georgia make the Bama adjustment? Bama got shredded because Josh Heupel isolated a mismatch and he exploited it. I mean, really, that game, that Tennessee-Bama game comes down to a mismatch and home field. That's what it came down to. And Tennessee took full advantage of it and they leveraged it. Well, they don't have home field in this one. And the second unknowable part is there a mismatch out there? I keep thinking back every time I go about it on this game. I keep thinking back to the spring and the summer when our focus was on that corner rotation at Georgia. And surely you think to yourself, they've got those questions answered by now. Well, yeah, they answered the questions in fall camp pretty convincingly to their coaching staff's liking. What you don't know is overall what caliber of player do you have in that secondary. You don't really know overall how the caliber of player you have matches up to this kind of pressure put on it because the pressure hadn't been put on it yet. The great unknowable is you saw all those guys go off to the draft, right? And then the next thing you saw was Georgia obliterate Oregon, and you forgot all about it. That Oregon team in week 1 wasn't the one that was going to provide the stiffest challenge. This Tennessee team is. And so we've got the huge dam with that block G on it, and it's just Georgia, right? It's just a Georgia defense again. It may very well be. That's why I'm calling it a question. But you finally get the water pressure against it. And much as was the case with Bama, who in the world was talking about DeMarco Hellams going into that game? Bama fans, how many of you were talking about the Hyatt versus DeMarco Hellams mismatch? Absolutely none of you, myself included. We didn't talk about it on this game. That's what a great offense can do. That's what a great play caller can do. And they got one at Tennessee. So when we get to halftime Saturday, has it played out largely like you would expect on paper? Or is there one or two little columns in that stat sheet they hand you at halftime, the paper's still hot, rub it against your face, feels great, where you say, wow, didn't expect that. And if that's the case, where are they? Because Georgia could do it to Tennessee too. I'm just saying it feels like we know a lot less about Tennessee because Georgia's a more proven commodity. Here we go. Let's take a look at what the model thinks as opposed to what the Vegas line is. And we're recording this live on Tuesday night, and Georgia's favored by 8.5. I don't know what it'll be come Friday. I expect there's got to be some Tennessee money out there somewhere. The model is only 2 points off, but it's under a very important number. The Caesars line is Georgia minus 8.5. Our line is Georgia minus 6.5. When I went back to that Bama game and I told you I thought it was about a mismatch and home field, what I kept coming back to on this game is how much I thought home field mattered to Tennessee when they beat Alabama. Now, here's what I'm not telling you. I don't think the environment and the atmosphere in Sanford Stadium this Saturday, as great as it's going to be, I don't think it's going to do a number on Tennessee, only because I think the kind of offense they run sort of limits a crowd's ability to impact them as much as you would a more traditional offense. So it's not that. It's the inability to harness that home crowd that I worry about a little bit too much to pick them outright. But those are way too many points for me. So I'm taking Tennessee plus 8.5. I do, however, trust the model, and I'll go Georgia to win. And that means I think it's a one-possession, four-quarter, maybe an instant classic kind of game. At which point, if I'm right, we walk away saying, how far is Tennessee really about to drop? And then regardless, obviously a top 3 team is going to lose here when we're talking about the playoff rankings. So you're going to have conversation in the what-if game either way. But currently the odds to win the national championship, we got number 2, Georgia, at plus 300 or plus 200. And we got number 4, Tennessee, at plus 1,000. Again, if you think Tennessee's going to win Saturday, you might as well place $1 or $2 there on Tennessee at plus 1,000 to win it all, because they would put themselves in the driver's seat. So I'll take Georgia to win. We'll take Tennessee to cover. Probably the kind of game where no outcome surprises me. Wild variance on this one. This is not one of those games where you look at it and you say, it's like when the Titans and the Steelers used to play in the NFL playoffs, and you felt so confident that's a 3 or 6 point game either way. That's not this. This thing could be a 21-point win either way. You have no clue how much variance there is on this kind of game because of the amount of volatility that the kinds of offensive pieces we have in this game can throw into the blender. So I'm looking forward to it. We'll be there. We'll be on the field. I'm ecstatic. I'm excited. We hadn't been to a game in Athens in quite a while. Thanks for watching, guys. Don't leave yet. Don't leave yet. Make sure you like the video and please subscribe to the channel. Not just for me. That's how we keep this entire thing free.